Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am so excited to have you join me this week because I have another author interview for you. This time it is with author Fran Wilde, and she is a fantasy writer. She's written some short stories and some novels. You may have heard of one of her series of short stories and books set in the Gem. Was it the Gem universe? The Jewel in Her Lapidary is one of those. We are going to talk today about her new book coming out on September 26th, which is the final book in her Bone Universe trilogy, and that is called Horizon. If you haven't read the first two books, Updraft and Cloudbound, you should. You should read them before you try to read the third book, because that's always important. But B, you should read all three of them, because this is, as I tell Fran in our interview, really one of the most unique fantasy series I have ever read. It is the most unique and interesting settings that I have ever encountered, and she really creates this world that is just amazing and not what you often find in fantasy books. And I'm not dissing other kinds of fantasy books because I love fantasy, as you know if you listen to this podcast. But it's not kind of, sometimes you think about fantasy and you think about magic, maybe trolls, maybe elves, maybe dwarves, that kind of thing. This is not that. But it's fantasy. There's a lot of character and plot development, and it's just fascinating. I'm going to let her talk about it, but I will give you a brief description of the book, and this comes from Amazon, and it says, "A city of living bone towers, crumbles to the ground, and danger abounds. Kirit Densira has lost everything she loved the most, her mother, her home, and the skies above. Nat Brokenwings, once Kirit's brother long before the rebellion tore them apart, is still trying to save his family in the face of catastrophe. They will need to band together once more to ensure not just their own survival, but that of their entire community." So that's a really brief description of the book, and it gives you a taste, but you should really check out this series because it is so interesting. It is so fascinating, and I don't know quite how to describe it, and I don't want to describe it because, as I said, it's very unique, and it kept me guessing a little bit in certain ways, so I don't want to give anything away. So I will just say, go out, get this trilogy. If you've read this first two and you are eagerly awaiting the third one, you will not be disappointed. But I'm going to let Fran herself tell you a little bit more about her writing and this book in particular. But before we get to that, I do want to say one more thing, and that is, as I was editing this podcast, I tried to edit as best that I could, but I was having a lot of allergy and asthma issues when we did this interview, and I didn't realize just how heavily I was breathing into the microphone. I thought I was far enough back while Fran was speaking. So as I said, I tried to edit a lot of that out. But if you hear heavy breathing, it is not an obscene phone call. It is just me struggling to get oxygen to my brain while having not an asthma attack, but having asthma issues. So I apologize in advance if there's any heavy breathing in your ear. And now, without further ado or interjections on my part, let's get to the interview with Fran Wilde. Hi, Fran. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So we are here today to talk about the third in your trilogy of books. But for my listeners who maybe haven't read your books or who are just now getting familiar with you, would you share a little bit about yourself, whatever you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. My first novel was published by Tor in 2015. It's called Updraft, and it is about a city of living bone, and the people who live there fly high above the clouds on man-made wings. There are also monsters. I've talked a little bit about the monsters in places like the Washington Post and on any number of blog posts, and you can find that on my website, which is franwilde.net. The next two books that came out in the series came out in 2016 and now in 2017, and they're called Cloudbound, which is narrated by a different person within the city. And then Horizon is the third and final book, and that's narrated by several different people for a variety of very, very good reasons. I also write in the Gem universe, which the Updraft, Cloudbound, and Horizon are in the Bone universe. The Gem universe is The Jewel in Her Lapidary and some short stories, but soon there will be 2 more novellas coming out from thorugh.com. And I have some exciting stuff happening that I can't talk about yet.
Okay. Ooh, good. A teaser. We love that. So we're going to talk about the trilogy and the new book in just a minute, but let's talk a little bit about your writing. When did you begin writing?
Sure.
Is it something that you've always wanted to do?
I've always written. I was a poet for a very, very long time. I have an MFA in poetry from a school called Warren Wilson College in North Carolina, and I love poetry, but I was always sort of a stealth fiction writer, and especially a stealth science fiction and fantasy writer. So I did a lot of reading and a lot of very quiet story starts, but I never really finished anything as fiction-wise until about 2011. And or 2010 maybe. I finished my first short story in 2010, and I started miraculously after finishing stories that suddenly you're able to sell stories. I sold my first story in 2011 and published in Nature magazine, which is really fun. It was like a 700-word short story in Nature magazine. I published a couple in Daily Science Fiction, and the Nature one was great because I'm married to a biochemist. So he had never been published in Nature magazine, so I got to say first. I was first, and I got a print made and I had it framed and did all the things that you do when you're trying to rub it in that you were first in Nature magazine.
I'm sure he appreciated that.
He did. I really love writing sort of the science and engineering angles in fiction. So I did a lot of short stories that talk about class issues, but also craft and artisan culture. I do a lot with, again, engineering and technology. I was a computer programmer and a game designer for quite some time. So most of my stories have at some point in them some sort of game angle or some sort of computer aspect to them. Even the fantasy in Cloudbound, the game is actually a game within the story. And one of my friends designed a board game for me to go with it, which was really, really exciting. Wow. Yeah.
So actually, that's something that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. There is a lot of engineering, a lot of physics, a lot of science in this trilogy because it is a group of people who fly on man-made wings. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, there are 2 different ways to come at this. One is I did a lot of research. I have a presentation that I've given at the Library of Congress on the topic of 2,000 years of man-made wings. And I went to Uppsala, Sweden this past summer and did the same presentation there, which was really exciting. Just the idea of flying without being propelled through the air using fossil fuels or anything else, that idea has fascinated us for thousands of years. Everything from Icarus and Daedalus to some of the early monks and polymaths during the Byzantine era really wanted to fly. So they tried to do it by sort of jumping off of towers, and most of it ended very badly. But we have figured out how it works, and gliders and wingsuits are happening now, and it's so fascinating to watch them. I got really, really into watching the wingsuit flyers for a while. And so when I was ready to start writing the flight scenes, I actually got into a wind tunnel where West Point's skydiving team trains, and I got to do some wind tunnel maneuvers in there so that I would understand what it felt like and the physics and everything. And I didn't really tell anybody that I was scared of heights and got vertigo before I did it.
Oh my gosh.
It was very exciting, but I loved it. I learned a lot. And now that there are these indoor skydiving places all over, people can try it and see what it feels like for themselves, which is kind of exciting. So I did a lot of research, but I also have a science writing background, and I was the science writer for the Whiting School of Engineering, for Loyola College, for a bunch of colleges and universities in Maryland, and I did a lot of translating for several of my family members who speak engineering fluently. They are hydrodynamic, naval architect, marine engineers, and I can spell. And so they would have me look over their papers, and the chemist, my spouse, same thing. I did a lot of work for them, editing and proofreading. So when it came time to be working in the sciences as a writer, it was sort of a natural shift for me, and I really loved doing it. I loved writing for my science clients and writing articles for them, as well as different things that explain to alumni what they were doing in their practice. I got to write about things like microfluidic bubble pumps and phosphofructokinase and just all kinds of big sciencey concepts. But my favorite, and probably where I really live, is engineering, because that's the thing that exists everywhere. It's kind of like water. You know it's there, but you don't necessarily see it because it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that engineers get as much of the recognition that they deserve as physicists and astrophysicists do. So I really wanted to kind of build that into the culture and make it be prevalent. And because the community in Updraft is a bridge-based, or it's a tower-based community, you need ways to get around, and they are a scarcity society as well, so they have a limited number of resources. So the idea of bridges being a huge engineering topic, but also wings and man-made wings and building wings out of silk and bone really becomes a feat of engineering and a magnificent way to manage the winds that you get up at high altitude. And when you have very, very steep structures, they generate some of their own updrafts. So making that part of the world and making that part of the action and the plot was really something very, very fun, but it was also a way to highlight the fact that there's science in everything. Mm-hmm. And I love that.
And I have to say that I love listening to Fran talk about science. Isn't she amazing? I do have to jump in here with our first break of the podcast, so stay tuned and we'll come back with more of my interview with author Fran Wilde.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
So if you were in this series, I would imagine you would be in Artifacts.
I think I would be. I wrote a short story about Lyrus Vitt, who's the wingmaker, and I really enjoyed sort of doing his studio and figuring out where he would put all of his stuff. But I think probably I would be one of the artifactists who goes to invent new things mm-hmm. and figure out how stuff works, and then sort of lets everybody else handle it from there.
Nice. This is probably one of the most unique worlds that I've ever read about in a fantasy book. You know, usually you start reading a book or a series and things kind of, fall into place and you're like, okay, I know what's going on here. And it took me a while to kind of figure out what was going on in terms of their world. And I don't want to give too much away because the end of the second book kind of reveals something pretty amazing, and I don't think I was prepared for it. But just talk a little bit about the world making that went into this series and how you came up with it.
In a couple of different ways. I was pretty steeped in the classical literature in college, but I also had I did a double / something major where I studied 18th century English literature and Milton. I was a Paradise Law scholar at one point, and then I also did a second course of study in international relations and focused primarily on maritime law, but just the idea of trading and how between different communities you have to have all these agreements. And I wanted, when you have a city, you normally think of that city as a singular object. And I really wanted to point out that each of the towers was kind of a culture in and of itself, and they each had their own things that they wanted to trade back and forth. So the maps and the lists that I made were pretty epic going into it. But the first time that the world appeared was in a short story that I wrote for Viable Paradise, which is a workshop set on Martha's Vineyard. It's wonderful. It is a week long, 5 great instructors every year. I think this year Elizabeth Bear, Scott Lynch, Max Gladstone, Aaron Black from Scholastic's going to be there, Patrick and Teresa Nielsen Hayden, usually Sherwood's there. There are a bunch of instructors that come in and out, but it's just a fantastic group of people, and you get some really close instructional time. And I had come in there as a short story writer. I was convinced I was a short story writer. Maybe sometime I would do a novel. But the instructors, in particular Elizabeth Bear and Jim McDonald, convinced me that I should try and write a novel. And I went into one of the activities and came out of it with a short story that was the setting for Updraft. And in particular, all of my classmates, there were 24 of them, kept a very good secret for 3.5 years, because that short story that was read aloud and everybody at Viable Paradise that year saw it, has the ending to Cloudbound in it.
Oh, okay.
And so 24 people knew, and no one told anybody, which was fantastic. Just huge props to my class.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us specifically about the new book, about Horizon. When does it come out? Give us a little bit of what you can, without giving too much away.
Absolutely. So Horizon is the completion of the trilogy. I am so excited to be able to say that, what began with Updraft and continued in Cloudbound. And Cloudbound is sort of gives you a little bit of the history of the community and how things happen, but there's also a mystery and there's also some other things that happen. But Horizon is really the culmination of a lot of thematic threads, as well as its own adventure in my mind. And because of the way that Cloudbound leaves things, it has to be told from 3 different perspectives. It really cannot be told any other way. And so the thing that with Updraft Updraft is a book about voice. It's a book about finding your voice. It's a book about who gets to speak and who gets to be heard. It is about the voice of a community. And Cloudbound is really about leadership and about learning to lead and who gets to lead and who doesn't and who should lead and who shouldn't. And Horizon, for me especially, is a book about community. And it's a book about what happens when a community breaks down, but also about rebuilding community and what's really important when that happens. And so to have multiple voices speaking out their beliefs and interacting with each other, but also working very hard to preserve different aspects of the community and strengthen it, was really one of the biggest challenges, and also I think one of my favorite things about the book. At the same time, they're still, as usual for me, running for their lives, and things happen, and lots and lots and lots of stuff goes very, very deeply wrong, and they have to recover from that. And there are familiar faces coming back. Anybody who is a huge fan of Updraft will be very glad to hear that one of your favorites is back. More than one of your favorites, but definitely one of your favorites, Cloudbound 2. And I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a theme in Updraft and Cloudbound that has to do with singing. In Updraft, singing is something that you memorize. It's something that is done by rote that is used to control people. And in Cloudbound, they sort of start messing with the songs and experimenting playing and adding new lines and twisting meanings a little bit. In Horizon, they're really writing new songs. Mm-hmm. And they're writing new songs that add to the community and also help people and really sort of fight for what they think is right. And I think that progression of memory and meaning into a new sense of a way to weave community together is part of, for me, what makes Horizon one of my favorites. There's a line at the end of Horizon that is refocusing from a very important line for me from the beginning of Updraft, and the fact that it loops back around feels very song-like to me. Mm-hmm. And every time I hit that line, I'm like, oh God, I can't believe it's over. This is really hard. And even when I'm reading Updraft, when I'm reading that first couple pages of Updraft, when I hit the line that it reflects on, I get kind of sad and a little bit wistful, but also very excited. I think that the story has kind of been told start to finish.
Right.
There is a lot of falling in Horizon, and there's a lot of venturing out and seeing new things that the danger has expanded exponentially, but also the friendships are really being tested in this book.
Yes. Now, two of the narrators in Horizon will be familiar because they are the narrators from the first two books, Kirit from the first one and Nat from the second. And the third, the third voice, McCall, I don't know how you pronounce it, is McCall. Okay, is the third voice, and we've met him before, but he's a new voice in terms of we're getting his point of view. Was it a challenge at all to write from three different perspectives in this book?
Absolutely. And yet it was super fun also. I think with McCall's voice especially, I could hear him so clearly and I could hear Nat and Kirit because I had written them for so long before. But McCall's voice in particular is something, it's kind of a calming force. Mm-hmm. And you don't have that with Nat or Kirit ever.
No.
So getting that sort of calm, sort of magistral perspective into the book at a time when everything is kind of starting to really crumble and fall apart was really huge. It changed the entire aspect of that book. And he's such a compelling character because he really is caught between all of the different politics and all of the different aspects of the world. That he and the people that he is with are very, very important to the survival of the community. But he also has absolutely no idea what is going on whatsoever. Right. And so that makes him a really interesting character to write because I know what's going on and he can't.
Right.
So it was fun. When I sat down to write them, I sort of outlined the whole book. I sketched it in and I wrote it the first time. And then I set that aside and sort of knowing where I wanted everybody to get, I wrote each character's narrative arc separately. So I spent 30,000 words writing McCall's story. And then I spent 30,000 words writing Kirit's story. And then I went and spent 30,000 words writing Nat's story and making sure all their voices were singular and identifiable and that really, really were true to the original. And that was something that each draft that I went through with my editor, Miriam Weinberg, and also with my agent, Barry Goldblatt, we talked very much about making sure that those voices were standalones and really stood out, but that they all balanced each other, which is a huge thing when you're trying to write multiple POVs. Mm-hmm. And then when I was pretty satisfied, I started to weave them together and give them a way to tell the story that wasn't ever, I didn't want it to repeat. I didn't want anything to go back and say, meanwhile, back at the ranch. But at the same time, I really wanted that it to sort of be three separate parts of the same song so that you got the idea that they were working towards a similar end, although maybe they didn't really realize it at the time. And I really wanted it to be characters that you felt you knew very well instead of risking writing three POVs that were actually one voice. So I think that was the greatest craft challenge this time through, and it was also probably the most fun for me.
I'm sneaking in here with one more break. This is our second break of the podcast, but stay tuned and we will be right back with more Fran Wilde.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
You've touched a little bit on some of these elements, but are there any autobiographical elements in either the characters or the story?
You know, I think probably Nat's fear of falling is probably mine too.
Yeah, sure.
And there is a point in Updraft where Kira screams for so long and she's up so high that she sort of loses her breath and goes hypoxic, and everything starts to close in on her as she starts to pass out. And it's similar in a way to what happens sometimes when I get migraines and I get other things. So I think that's part of it. But definitely there is one character that in both Cloudbound and Horizon who his name is John, and he is the artifact. So I think you're reading me pretty well, actually. But he has a version for that world of something that is very close to adult onset scoliosis. His spine is twisting, mm-hmm. and you have to be straight in order to fly. So he's sort of already at sort of on the margins of society, even though he's one of the most brilliant artifacts that they have. Things have happened with him because of this. The society has viewed him in different ways because of this, but he's also been engineering his sort of own way out. He's made himself a brace that can sort of keep him upright in a way and can keep him comfortable, even as his spine is starting to twist and collapse in so that his, it's harder to breathe. It's definitely harder to walk, that sort of stuff. I've had spinal and structural issues since I was a baby, and the back brace thing definitely resonates with me. I had one for a bunch of junior high and high school, and the echoes of that still are with me, as well as some other stuff that's going on. So I think with John's character, that one I definitely know in and out. But I also tried to write throughout all three books characters with different disabilities, different family connections. I wanted to write a really complicated family structure where everybody had, younger siblings and older relatives and people that they were looking out for, as well as people that they weren't really sure, had any value to the community, just to look at that multi-generational aspect as well, because I think that's really important.
Yeah, and so there's biological family, but then there's also, your family in whatever tower you live in. So you've got those relationships that aren't necessarily biological, but are still just as important.
Yes, and there's also a family of choice, just with a flying community where there is a lot of gravity problems. That's a technical term. There's an advantage to having more family or more connected people than you would normally have. So I think that there are a lot of people in the books that are making sort of bigger extended families of choice mm-hmm. as well.
Mm-hmm. This is the conclusion of the trilogy. Do you think, though, that you would ever return to this world or any of these characters?
I think that the main characters are probably done. Mm-hmm. I have definitely entertained the idea of returning to the world, at least in short stories, if not in bigger pieces. I think I would love to do that at some point. There are definitely some aspects of Horizon that I would love to explore some more. I think it would be a lot of fun to just look at the different communities and cultures that are coming out of Horizon. Yeah. But I think that's probably going to be done in short stories more than anything else. It depends on the level of interest. If people really fall in love with it, we'll see.
Okay, nice. And what are you working on right now? I mean, I know this one's just coming out, but are you working on anything new?
I am working on the next two novellas for the GEM universe. One is about a fire opal that is the jeweled mechanism for a clock in the GEM universe in a much more modern period of time. And the other is something to be seen. It's difficult to explain, but it's basically a GEM user's manual that has a character inside of it that is trying to break out. So it's a bit more of a meta text. I'm also working on a YA that I've been working on for a while, but I'm really excited about, and a middle grade.
Okay, thank you. When it comes to writing, do you have a schedule? Do you have a favorite place to write? What does that look like for you?
I do have a schedule. I tend to write for a little while before my family wakes up in the morning, and then I get everybody off to school, and then I sit down, and if I don't look at Twitter, then I have about 2 hours to write. And I really, really enjoy that time. But lately, I've also been using that time to do things like call my senators and focus on being an active citizen and an active participant in my community. So it's gotten a little bit shiftier. I find that I write really well when I know that I don't have to be anywhere for a good chunk of time. So if there's a point where I have to pick up somebody from my family or go to an appointment or something, it gets a little harder to write. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody else has that, but if I set a timer, if I say, okay, I'm going to write this and I'm going to shoot for this many words, I don't have to make that, but I'm going to write for an hour, then I can write for an hour. I can write for 20 minutes, and I can get a good chunk of what I need to do done in those 20 minutes. So just breaking that time out is great. Mm-hmm. I had my own office in my previous, where we lived before we moved in January, and I lost my office, but I gained this enormous window because we live in an old reconstructed barn now, and basically my window is the old hay door for the barn. So I get to sit on my little lounge sort of chair in the window and write, and that has been wonderful. Just because I can watch, all the sort of the random urban wildlife that pass through, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So we get a lot of squirrels. We get some we get some lost deer every once in a while. the neighborhood cat cruises by. It's really fun.
Nice. When you read, what are your favorite genres? Who are your favorite authors?
I read everything. I read nonfiction. I read fiction. I read literary fiction. I read genre all the time. Lately, I'm doing a lot of blurbing for books and short story collections that are coming out soon. Mm-hmm. So I find myself reading many, many things very fast. I read a lot of poetry as well, and I think one of the things that I love doing is this podcast that we were talking about before we started the recording. Mm-hmm. Cooking the Books lets me and my co-host, Aliette de Baudard, read books that are about to come out, like Yoon Ha Lee's Nine Fox Gambit, and talk to, we got to talk to him about just his series and how he's using food in the series, which was really fun. We're about to talk to Carmen Maria Machado about Her Body and Other Parties, which is an amazing collection of short stories. And so I'm looking super forward to that. I read, like I said, just about everything else. I was just talking with somebody yesterday about the fact that I still really enjoy reading nonfiction science books. One of them is The Riddle of the Labyrinth, which is about the decoding of linear B, which is fascinating to me. Another favorite author is David Quammen. He used to write for Outside Magazine, and he wrote a book in the late 90s, early 2000s about island biogeography and the race to publish the theory of evolution between Darwin and Wallace, which is a great book. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but it was a fascinating read. I love reading Borges. I love China Miéville. His especially Embassy Town is one of my favorites, but his short story collection, Looking for Jake, is where I met him, and there are still some stories in there that I just absolutely adore. Nora Jemisin, N.K. Jemisin, Anne Leckie, Corinne Duvas. I really, really enjoy reading new and emerging authors like J.Y. Yang and Sarah Gailey. Absolutely adore Kate Elliott. as well as Kate Milford, who wrote one of my favorite boat books last year, The Left-Handed Fate. Her follow-up to that is the second in the Green Glass House series, The Ghost of Green Glass House, and that's coming out very soon. And I could just keep going, but I want to mention Kat Howard has An Unkindness of Magicians that comes out the same day as Horizon, and Anne Leckie's Provenance comes out the same day as well. And all of these books are so great. Kat Howard is this magical writer, and she and I have just written a short story that will be in the Barnes & Noble log shortly. So I'm very excited about that. I think that in addition, I am really looking forward to seeing what the next couple of years bring as far as new and emerging voices. Theodora Goss, who wrote an extraordinary book called The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, has the sequel coming out next year. And this, if you look at the cover of The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, it looks like The Poisoner's Handbook and Jane Steele kind of got together and had a little book baby. And that's really what it is on the inside. It's this amazing book. And so I'm really excited about the sequel to that.
Excellent.
So I gave you like a huge library of things.
No, that's
also,
awesome. I love it.
I read a lot of, yeah. I love Neruda. I love Neil Stephenson. Despite everything, I think there is a huge range of authors that I just adore reading. So it's a tough question.
I know. It's like asking you to choose your favorite child.
It pretty much is.
What else would you like people to know? Specifically, I guess before we get to that, where can people find you? You've mentioned your website, but just give us the rundown of where people can find you on the internet, on social media, your podcast name again, etc.
Sure. So franwilde.net, FRANWILDE.net, and I am Fran_Wilde at Twitter. I'm much funnier on Twitter. I am on Instagram as Fran_Wilde, and I'm on Facebook as Fran Wilde Writes. If you are in the Philadelphia, Delaware, and New Jersey area, I will be at Barnes & Noble Rittenhouse Square on September 26th at 7 o'clock with Chuck Wendig to launch Horizon. After that, I'll be on Reddit AMA on the 28th, and I will be at Capclave. I'll be at Fall for the Book in Northern Virginia on the 14th of October. On the 15th of October, I'll be in San Diego with Kevin Hearn. We're doing a ticketed event out there. You can go to Kevin Hearn's website and learn all about it. I will be on the 18th. On the 17th, I will be in San Francisco. On the 18th, I will be in Portland, Oregon. And on the 19th, I will be in Seattle. And all three of those events are with Kevin Hearn and Chuck Wendig, so it should be plenty funny. Last but not least, I will be at Fountain Books in Richmond, Virginia on this leg of the tour. There are a couple of other things that are going to be added in shortly, but the Fountain Books event is Sunday, October 22nd, I believe, at 2 o'clock. So hopefully a lot of Southern Virginia will come out to see that because I've got a lot of friends there, and I'm teaching at University of Richmond just following up after that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about?
If you love books that you read, definitely don't forget to review them, recommend them, send them to your friends, come out to events and support the authors that you love. It makes a huge difference. And it really, I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about everybody that you love to read. It really does matter.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to sit down and talk with me about your trilogy and your new book, Horizon.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate all the work that you put into this.
Oh, you're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye. Once again, I want to thank my guest, author Fran Wilde, for taking the time out of her day to speak with me. I want to encourage you to go out and get Horizon if you have read the first two. If you haven't read the first two, what are you waiting for? Go get Updraft and Cloudbound and read the whole series. And again, It's so fun. It's so unique. I do not want to give anything away. I want you to be just as surprised as I was by certain plot elements and things that she comes up with. I also want to say she is so much fun to talk to. I hope you had as much fun listening to her as I had talking to her. And I would love, if it were possible, to just wander around in her brain for the day. Just take a day and wander around Fran's brain because, wow, what a fascinating place, right? So thank you again, Fran, for taking the time to speak with me about your book. I really appreciate it. And thank you, listeners, for taking the time again to listen to me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you will join me again next week. I'm excited. I have another author interview. I have so many author interviews lined up right now, and I am loving every moment of it. But next week, I will be speaking with Kelly Garrett, author of Hollywood Homicide. So we've got a slightly different genre from today's interview. As always, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, any app that you use for your mobile device, really. And you can follow us on social media. Please come follow us on social media. We would love to hear from you. I don't know why I'm saying we. We as in all of the podcast hosts. But I would love to hear from you on the Book Review Podcast. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram, GSMC Book Review. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Join me again next week when I'm speaking with Kelly Garrett about her book, Hollywood Homicide. In the meantime, as always, go out and get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.